All right, back in the basement again today to talk about this, the Ivanko OBX-20kg, 29 millimeters in black oxide. There are some other variations very similar to this bar, the OBX-S, which is this bar but in stainless steel, then also just the OBX-20kg in black oxide, which is an Olympic powerlifting barbell, but it is 28 millimeters. So this is the 29 millimeter version, and this is the one to get if you're going to get one. But should you get one is the question that I just want to talk about in today's video. Now, when it comes to Ivanko, they have a well-known history of quality behind them. They've been around since the 60s, and to be honest, some of their plates are some of the most iconic in my opinion, and I've actually owned some of their calibrated plates as well. So a very well-known made in USA company, which doesn't make everything in the USA today. This bar, however, is, but also just one of the holdovers from, the 60s that you have a lot of people collecting the vintage style stuff, and in some cases, they're still making some very high quality things these days. Not like maybe York Barbell, who is known for the vintage side, but these days is now known for just importing everything, which Ivanko still does, but this bar is not. To my knowledge, they're still making most, if not all, their bars here in the United States. However, you don't see that much about them, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to pick this bar up. I have a lot of barbells, right? And again, I like Ivanko as a brand, as a company. This is the bar that's most readily available and likened to what I lift for, which is powerlifting. However, there's no reviews here on YouTube. And that's one of the things that I still do, even though I buy a lot of equipment. Anytime I make a purchase, I go on YouTube, I see if there's any reviews. I try to get an idea if something is worth buying, because if it's a brand new item, which this is not, I could take a flyer on it because I get burned in it. It'll at least make a good video. But if I can make an educated decision on something that's been around for a while, I'm going to try to do that as much as possible. Was not the case with this bar. And I've had my eye on it for a long time, but one of the holdups of me buying it was the price tag. So list price on this bar is $550 before shipping. Ivanko is located out in Los Angeles. To get over to me here in Rhode Island, shipping was another $70, at least it said on the website. So all in, it's like $633 delivered to my door, which is why it sat in my cart for well over a year. But this 4th of July, Ivanko did have a sale. It's 15% off, something like that. Net of it is, it ended up being about $500 total shipped to my door. I thought that was a deal worth taking a flyer on. I know some of my friends out there who have the stainless steel version really love this bar. I'll talk about that in a second, how this potentially compares to it. But at that price point, I said, you know what? It's worth taking a flyer on. I like the Ivanko brand, the name. It's something I want to go ahead and just try. And maybe I can help some others make decisions on it if this is a bar that you're looking at. So some basic things about it. Let's talk about the specs. Everybody loves specs, as I do. It's not just about name brand in some cases. In most cases, they're a name brand for a reason. And that reason is the specs. So let's talk about the specs on this bar. As I mentioned, this is the 29 millimeter version, which if you're interested in powerlifting, I think is the go-to size for a power bar. That just makes the most sense. It's going to give you the stiffest bar overall for squatting, benching, and deadlifting. There are some other factors that come into play, of course, as well, but this bar is great at all three of those movements. I was able to use this for squatting, for benching, and for deadlifting without any issue, and it did a phenomenal job at that. The tensile strength on this, it says 200,000 plus PSI tensile strength. Maybe it's 2001, I don't know, who knows? But it's stiff enough to the point where as long as it's over, in my opinion, 190K, which this bar is, you shouldn't have any issues. Once it's under that number, it usually lets you know that the steel and quality isn't as great, and it's more apt to be deformed from you doing stuff with it. This is not a bar I would potentially do rack pulls with anyways, but just be noted that that is the case. 200K PSI on this bad boy. Some other things on this which are really interesting, as you don't oftentimes see this listed on the specs for barbells, is this has been mag tested. Don't know what that is. This has been x-rayed to make sure it's straight. It has a straightness guarantee that it's within a certain tolerance of being straight. Never seen that on a bar either. And there's some other things on here that you just don't see. Now, does that make a difference at the end of the day? I don't know, because I don't have anything to compare it to, and I don't actually know what it tests for. But in terms of performance and how this thing is built, what I will say is it's top notch, baby. Really, really well put together. And what I mean by that is it starts at the end with the end caps. Take a look at these end caps. Really unique, something you don't see anymore. And this is something that I would be totally accustomed to if I was looking at vintage bars on Facebook or eBay or something like that. This is what I see, because this looks very similar to some of the bars that they made back in the 60s. But having been made, as of recently as 2022, I think this is truly unique and it looks really, really cool. Now, servicing these things probably isn't going to be as easy as like a snap ring plier, taking it off, but with the build quality, I don't think you're going to have that much issue. And of the hundreds of bars that I've owned, the only time I've really taken the sleeve off, outside of maybe 1 or 2 times, was just to kind of show you guys in videos what that looks like. So I don't find that you need to do that with a lot of high quality barbell. So I'm not too worried about it. Now, I mentioned this bar itself is in black oxide. For me, black oxide is a finish that I like. It's a cheap finish overall. When you take a look at the corrosion resistance, it does not offer much compared to other things like zinc or Cerakote or stainless steel or chrome even. But the reason I like black oxide is, number one, the look. This thing looks real nice, all blacked out, murdered out with those shiny chrome type end caps. This thing's looking really nice. And I'm in a temperature controlled environment where I regulate the humidity down here, so I don't have any issues with corrosion even on bare steel bars. So the black oxide holds up really well in that regard too. And because this doesn't offer much corrosion resistance, or maybe one of the reasons why it doesn't, I should say, is because it's a very light coating on here, which means that it gives you a fairly good feel of the knurl, comparatively speaking, to other things like chrome and zinc and Cerakote. Now, that being the case, though, it will also not necessarily hold up the best over time, especially on the sleeves as you put plates on and off. Especially with me, if you have tight tolerance plates, machine plates, calibrated plates, you're going to see a lot more sleeve wear. That is to be expected, but my other black oxide bars that I own have all held up really well. So black oxide for me is an okay finish, as long as you're okay with the caveats that I mentioned already. Now, speaking of the sleeves and showing a little bit of wear and tear, they're starting to show a little bit, not too much. Those will clean right up. I don't care. I'm not that anal where I have to clean my sleeves after every use. I will sometimes just get a rag and kind of wipe off some of the residue, especially when you first get this bar, because you'll probably notice the first couple of times getting your plates on and off, you will have more residue than after it's broken in a little bit. But as you get those plates on and off, you are going to notice that zip sound that either can make or break a bar for you, because the sleeves on this thing are slightly ribbed. Take that for what it's worth. Doesn't bother me. Kind of lost a little bit in the black oxide finish, but there is definitely a zip sound associated with that. That brings us into the collars on these sleeves, and they might not look like much on first appearance, but these are actually bigger in diameter than a lot of normal Olympic barbell sleeves that I've had my hands on over the past couple of years. But again, you can't really tell unless you put it right next to it, which if size comparison is a thing like that, then you might be better off being small in some cases without comparing yourself directly to something that's larger. Keep that in mind, gents. But this thing is pretty cool and it's beveled on the back. Again, it looks really, really clean. You then see the bushings on the back, which are bronze. Everything looks really well. The spin is what you would expect for a power bar. It's smooth, it's there, but it's not overpronounced like you'd want on maybe like an Olympic type bar where you're doing special lifts with, or even in some cases, if the spin is too much on the sleeves, I find that to be really off-putting on things like squats and bench where the weights feel like they're moving or the bar feel like it's rolling a little bit. Not the case with this bar. As I mentioned, benching, squatting, deadlifting with this, all very, very good. Coming down here to the knurling, the first thing I'll say is the knurling termination points on this bar are great. Everything is super, super clean in that regard. The knurl itself is what I would consider a very dense pattern, what many would call small canos. So they're volcanic in style, so they're not pointy. They're tops cut off, if you will, and very small and dense in size, which means that the grip on this thing is actually pretty good, although it's not very aggressive because of that. So very small, condensed knurling, but there's enough contact points where you're going to get a good grip on this bar. But if you're the type that likes an aggressively knurled power bar, this is definitely not the bar for you. You will find that this is very passive in that regard. Now for me, again, doing things like squat and deadlift and bench to some extent, I didn't have any issues with this bar moving around. Squatting, the bar stayed on my back, no problem. Deadlifting, I think I was doing sets on deficits that I'm going to show you a clip of like 550 pounds with no chalk. Didn't have any issues with grip. So the way that this works is fine. But again, if you like aggressive bars, this is not going to be the bar for you. It does have your standard center knurl mark as well as the standard ring marks for powerlifting. So basics of the bar, the specs, they're all there. In fact, the specs go a little bit above and beyond and a little bit extra with all the different mag testing, x-ray testing, all that sort of stuff. But what cannot be said is the build quality of this. I can't give you a stat that lets you know the build quality is superb, which this bar is. And what I mean by that is when I take a look at any kind of slop in the sleeves or end caps or anything like that, it's non-existent. The sleeves on this thing do not budge even a millimeter. In fact, if I try to shake the sleeves, if you will, do the scientific test of sleeve shaking, my whole rack and J-cups and everything else will move and make a lot of noise. The bar itself, super quiet. In fact, if I just do a real basic drop test with this bar from just a few inches off the ground compared to a different type of bar, you can hear an audible difference in the sound that this makes because this thing is just so well put together and the build quality of it is fantastic to the point that I can't really explain it on video. I'm going to try with these sound tests and these visual tests, but it's really on a different level compared to some of the more standard bars and well-known brands of today's era that are readily available. So there's that. Now, that being said, however, this bar is not something that I would likely recommend to a lot of people. Like I said, build quality is great, made in USA, legacy brand in Ivanko. The problem for me is when it comes to the price point, which is always something to consider. Let's just say it's about $600 delivered, give or take. At that price point, I think there are better options that are cheaper, and even in some cases, better or similar options that are the same price. So case in point, one of the barbells that I've been using, which I have not done a video on, because I don't know if it's technically commercially available yet, is my American Barbell Chewy Bar. And I hesitate to say that because it's part of a collaboration with the Home Gym Discord, which I've talked about on Instagram a couple times, but I believe it's coming into production. It's going to be their new Elite Bar or something like that. I don't know the specifics behind it. I'll post about it and do a video when it's available. But one of the knocks on American Barbell, to go off on a tangent, has been that the knurl always seems passive, so they're working on a more aggressive knurl. This bar that I have has it. It's also stainless steel and has the same exceptional build quality, made in America, all that jazz, $595, so a very similar price point, but in my opinion, the same build quality, but better finishes as well. So that could be something to compare it to. Now, I also talk about how for my daily driver, or most recommended power bar for most people is the Rogue Ohio Power Bar, specifically in stainless steel. I think that's the best version of that bar, just based off of the feel of the knurl and the corrosion resistance that it offers. I think that bar right now is around the $450 price range, let's say, give or take $25 depending on delivery and taxes and things like that. But that's significantly less than this bar, and you're getting a better finish and, in my opinion, a better knurl. The trade-off being is, yes, while those things are true, the build quality on an Ohio Power Bar is not as solid as the build quality on this particular bar. So again, there are some trade-offs, but again, you could make an argument for a lot of barbells out there depending on what you're looking at. But generally speaking, I feel like this bar is just going to price itself out of consideration for many people who a lot of the things that this bar has to offer, the general public doesn't care as much about. Even some enthusiasts like myself might not care as much about, comparatively speaking, to what else is out there. So who is this bar for then? Well, in my opinion, someone who's really going to appreciate this bar is a connoisseur of all things strength. So if you have someone out there who's really into the vintage game, who really likes made in America stuff, history, strength, culture, I think they will better appreciate this bar in particular because of the extra steps that go into this, and they know the craftsmanship behind it. But your average gym person probably will just look at this bar and just think it's an overpriced and underperforming power bar. Now, there are some other options out there as well, too. You can go above budget. I mentioned that there's a stainless steel version of this, which I've heard very good things about. But that bar, I think, retails for around $1,200 to $1,300 if and when it's ever available again, which it hasn't been for quite some time. I believe there's a waiting list that some people have been on for a few years now. But I also kind of wonder if people really like that bar that much because they've sunk so much into it, they can't tell themselves that it's not worth it and not a good bar at that price point. So again, it's one of those things that depending on where you're coming from and what you think about certain things, I think that's going to heavily influence your opinion of that barbell. But at the end of the day, a very good bar from a very good company, some very good specs, Performance-wise does great, but I just think priced itself out of consideration for your average gym person. Let me know what you think about this bar in the comment section below. Is what I listed enough for you to consider buying it? Or are you better off spending less money and getting something that more fits to your needs, but might be imported from China or not as well built? Let me know down below. In the meantime, as always, thanks for watching and stay big.